Take it away.
Thank you. So, we listen to many talks on multi-channels, and what I want to do here is to bring the multi-channel aspect to a topic which is very popular, but was not discussed yet from this angle, and this is multi-channel word of mouth. And my main claim in this talk will be that the channel through which the communication flows is not a neutral pipeline, but it is rather an integral component of the word of mouth. And it should influence both the way we should do research on word of mouth and our insights on it. And I will also show that the brands, which are the topics of the conversation, are very important to this word of mouth channel interaction. And let's start. So if you think about it, from all the marketing phenomena we're interested in these days, word of mouth is the one in which, to my feeling, we have the highest gap between our level of interest and our level of understanding. And with all the huge investments by researchers and practitioners, our understanding of word of mouth is still, to a large degree, one-dimensional and doesn't capture the richness of the phenomena. Now, most of the research so far looked at channels from a data-driven point of view. So you have your research question, you get a database, mostly from a single channel, you do your analysis, and then you somehow assume that the results are valid also for other channels. And most of the data we have today come from online resources, and online data are easier to extract and analyze. Most of what we see today uses online data. However, if you look at the online-offline distribution of word of mouth in the real world, we have solid evidence that online word of mouth is not the main word of mouth activity. For the average person, most of the word of mouth that he or she distributes and consumes are offline. We assume that the word of mouth exists independent of the channel, and the channel is only a lens through which we observe the phenomena. However, in word of mouth, it's not true. In word of mouth, the channel is not just the medium, the technical medium through which the communication flows. It's not a signal transferred through a given channel. The person who distributes the word of mouth decides what to say, to whom to say, and what channel to use. So if I want to talk about a complicated financial service, I will probably not do it on Twitter. I will go, face-to-face or go in a discussion group. Some subjects are not for a phone call. Others can be easily discussed through email. So different channels carry different type of information. Now, if we agree that the channel is an integral part of the message design, then it makes sense to think, from a marketing perspective, that the choice of channel depends on the brands that are being talked about. So Jonah did a great job in bringing products back to the word-of-mouth arena and talked about visibility or inspiring products. And there are also other works, but it's not enough, from two reasons. First, these works are about products, not brands, not specific brands. And second, if you look at these papers, each is coming from a very specific theoretical framework. Each of them is talking about a very small set of characteristics. So our exploration of brand characteristics in word of mouth was more sporadic. Okay? And we felt the only way to bring all these factors together is to collect a comprehensive comparative data set and analyze it. And this is what we basically did. So we collected data with respect to 700 major national US brands from many categories. For each of these brands, we have weekly measures of offline word of mouth. We have daily measures of online word of mouth from blogs, microblogs, that's Twitter, and discussion groups. And then we looked at all the theoretical frameworks we use in marketing to describe brands and their characteristics, and try to think which ones would be relevant for word of mouth. And we collected data on all of them. And the results are dramatic. what we find is that in some sense, yes, we were searching where the light is. Word of mouth is not channel neutral. There are significant differences in word of mouth across channels. So if you look at media and entertainment brands, they have high number of mentions online and not offline. Cars are mentioned much more in discussion groups than in any other media. Telecommunication products go very well through Twitter. Okay? So it really depends on the category, and it depends on the brands that make the category. We also see that brand characteristics matter big time. So, and I will actually show you some results. As Sandy said, today is the second half of the day is the day where we show results. So let's start with the word of mouth, data. We collected a list with respect of 700 US major national brands that, according to our data sources, were the most highly mentioned during the 3.5 years of 2007 to 2010. Keller Fay is a marketing research firm owned by Brad Fay and Ed Keller. And they are, if you think of Nielsen as the ultimate source of measuring ratings, so Keller Fay is the Nielsen of offline word of mouth. And what they do is that every week they sample 700 people, a representative sample of the US population, different people every week. It's not a panel. And they ask them to run a little diary and document for 24 hours all the interactions they had with somebody else in which a brand was mentioned. And then they provide some details as to the content of the conversation, the balance, and some details about themselves. What we have as a result is the daily number of mentions since July 2007 for blogs, microblogs, that's Twitter, and discussion groups. And this is, again, the example for IKEA. And you can also see, even like without any sophisticated analysis, that there are some similarities and some differences. Okay? So this is the word of mouth data. And what I want to do now is to move to the first research question and ask, is word of mouth similar across channels? More precisely, we want to look at online-offline correlations and ask, are brands that are high on one channel, that are very popular, get a high level of mentions in one channel, are also very popular in other channels, and vice versa. We just looked at the total number of mentions for each brand in each channel for the period when we had data on all of them. So it's July 2008 to March 2010. And then we looked at the correlations. And let's see what we get. And you can see here that the numbers are nicely high. So it means that if a brand, on average, is mentioned highly in blogs, it will be also very popular in microblogs and also very popular in discussion groups. These different online channels carry a similar type of information. And that's surprising because they're so different from each other. Think about it, blogs and then Twitter, so short, and discussion groups that are kind of many-to-many channel, but still there are some similarities. Now, what happens when we add the correlation of the offline channels? You see here that the picture is totally different. The correlations are much lower, so we get correlations of 0.3 instead of the 0.8. It means that a brand that is popular in blogs and microblogs and discussion groups will probably don't have a high number of mentions offline. So what's the meaning? It means that marketing managers should not think that the offline and online databases are substitutes because they are complements. They carry different types of information. In spite of the fact that we are measuring on two different databases, we still see that brands that are, some brands or some product categories that are popular offline are also popular online. So the difference in correlation depends on the category. Now, this is not a proof. but it makes us feel better that the result is not an artifact of measuring on two databases, but it's rather an outcome of a fit between the product category and the channel. It brings me right to research question 2. If we want to understand how brand differences transfer to differences in word of mouth, and in order to do so, we have to leave the category level and start talking about brands and their characteristics. There's no agreed set of attributes that characterize a brand. So we looked through the literature and tried to map all the theoretical frameworks that people came with that might have something to do with word of mouth, and also specifically with the word of mouth channel interaction. So look at the type of good, for example. Search, experience, or credence good. You can say that for search goods, people look for information before they're purchasing. They need it for the decision. And if, let's say, discussion groups are more associated with information search, then we will see more discussion group mentions for search goods. I won't have time to talk about it today, but what we see is a match between the valence and the channel. So most word of mouth is positive. Okay? But most of the positive word of mouth go through blogs and face-to-face, and most of the negative word of mouth goes through Twitter. Starbucks sucks. Okay, you're not happy, you write. Each of these frameworks illuminates a certain aspect of the brand, and we don't know which one will be relevant for this word-of-mouth channel interaction, and therefore we made the effort and we collected data on all of them. Altogether, we have 35 to 40 responses per brand for each of our 700 brands. And what we have is around 5,000 completed questionnaires. And it was really tricky because the system had to be very smart with the allocations of brands to respond, because we wanted people to respond only on brands they knew. And we didn't want the questionnaire to be too long. So this is why we needed the help of a company like Decipher, because they expertise in these types of surveys. What do we see here? The type of good. Experience, you see, has a negative and significant coefficient online. It means that if the product is not an experience good, it gets more word of mouth online. What does it mean? It means that people go online more for information search than for sharing their experiences. And it makes sense, because if you look at the distribution across online data, you see that around 60% of the mentions come from discussion groups. If you remember the distribution of word of mouth, what are people talking about, you see that the everyday brands, the food, the beverages, the cleaning products, the household products are more talked offline. You see that the coefficient here is about 3 times the coefficient here. So people talk online about brands with a higher perceived risk. Perceived risk means that you have uncertainty as to the future eventual performance of the product, what you will actually get. And it goes very well with the result here. Age, well, yeah, people talk more about newer brands, but the effect is small, because people mainly talk about brands they know, and brands that are new. Sometimes people don't know them, and these are the most highly mentioned brands, and we still see some differences. And we have kind of many more analysis, and I will show you later if you want. Just to summarize. So, as I told you, we put most of our time and effort in building the database and doing the matching between all the data sources. But I think that even in this very preliminary stage, we can make some clear statements about multi-channel word of mouth. We started by saying that our understanding of word of mouth is one-dimensional. Okay, we are working on single online channels and looking at a very small set of attributes. What we try to do here is to extend our understanding, both in the types of channels we are talking about and with respect to brand characteristics. And with the channels, we say, hey, word of mouth looks different in different channels. We cannot automatically infer on offline behavior from online data. We should be very careful. Brand managers should think Where do they want to get the information from according to the brand that they are marketing? They will probably need both sources, both sources of information. With respect to the explaining variables, what we say is that there are different theoretical frameworks. Each of them has relevance. Each of them, as I said, illuminates a certain facet of the brand. Brand is a multifaceted creature. And in order to understand what's going on, in order to make clever decisions, we need this very, very multi-attributed, multi-theoretical framework to understand better what's going on, the word of mouth on brands, and the channels through which it flows. And am I good with time?
Well, given that, why don't we actually thank Renana for a fascinating talk. And moving to our next talk.